Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, April the 17th. Welcome to the 5th edition of Book Fun Friday. So 5 weeks ago when I set out to do these videos, my intention was to talk about young adult books in the hopes that anybody watching this who needed to put a book into the hands of their child or children, or themselves for that matter, anybody can read young adult literature. The idea behind it was that my recommendations would enable you to do that, since we're all distance learning right now. I maintained that the first 3 weeks. I talked about young adult books. Last week was different because I was technically on spring break, and so I read an adult book and discussed that last Friday. Well, today I'm going to return to my original intention for doing these videos, which is to recommend young adult novels. And the book I want to talk to you all about a little bit today is entitled Fever 1793. It's written by Laurie Halse. Laurie Halse happens to be my all-time favorite young adult writer. She's just wonderful. I think I've read everything that she's ever written. Let me tell you a little bit about Fever 1793. The main character of this book is a young girl. She's 14, almost 15 years old. Her name is Maddie Cook. And Maddie lives with her mother and her grandfather. Unfortunately, her father has passed away, but she lives with her mother and her grandfather in Philadelphia, which at the time was the capital city of the United States. And Maddie and her mother and her grandfather run a very successful coffee house in the heart of Philly. Well, the last 3 or 4 months of 1793 were terrible months for Philadelphia because there was a yellow fever outbreak during that time, and that's where the title comes from, Fever 1793. In the year 1993, an article came out commemorating the 200th year since that had occurred. Laurie Halse read that particular article and thought, be an interesting thing to write about in a young adult format. And so she created this historical fiction account of that particular time in the city of Philadelphia. Now, things in the beginning of the book, things are great. The coffee house is doing very well, but it doesn't take long before the fever infiltrates Maddie's home. And then the rest of the book details the story and what happens when that sickness infiltrates her family. I'm going to share a passage from this book, and I picked this particular passage on purpose, but let me set it up for you so that you'll understand why. I'm sure you saw on the news a week or so ago in New York where workers who were dressed in hazmat suits and all the coverings were burying unclaimed bodies of people who had died of the coronavirus. And I was struck by a couple of things that were happening in that particular news story. One, it was pretty jarring to see bodies put in boxes and boxes stacked on top of each other in what is technically a mass grave. But the other thing that I was struck by when I was watching that particular story was how clinical it was. The bodies were just, like I said, put in plain boxes. They were being attended by people in all sorts of protective gear. They were being stacked on top of each other and covered up by dirt. There were no flowers. There was no ceremony. There was no religious person presiding over that I could see. It was just a clinical, functioning, almost like a factory sort of situation, if you will, where the bodies were being buried. Keep that image in your mind then as I'm reading this passage from Fever 1793, and you'll understand why I picked it. The burial square was quiet, yet busy with activity. 30, maybe 40 men were methodically digging the earth and laying the dead to rest. 2 of them picked up a man's body and laid it on a large canvas cloth that reminded me of a sail I knew the man. They wrapped the cloth around him and quickly sewed the shroud shut with thick, curved needles. I stood behind them, silent and numb. They lifted the man's shroud by the top and the bottom and prepared to fling it into the open grave. My voice erupted. Stop! All heads turned to look at me. I didn't realize what I had done at first. The men set the shroud on the ground. You can't just toss him in there like a sack of potatoes, I said. Where's the minister? You're not supposed to bury people without prayers. The men looked at each other. The one who stood at the feet of the body spoke softly. The minister will come by later today and pray for all the dead, miss. There are so many people alive who need tending to that the dead have to wait their turn. I'm sure God will understand. Now please, miss, let us get on with the work. He bent over to pick up the shroud. Put him down, I said. The men ignored me. A voice hissed in my head. Shut up, Maddie, the voice said. You're a silly child. You have no business ordering these men around. Stop interfering and get out. This is no place for you. My head throbbed to the rhythm of the shovels biting into the earth. My hands decided what to do without consulting the rest of my body. I shoved the man who spoke to me. I shoved him so hard he nearly toppled into the grave. He scrambled to his feet, protesting, and I ran up to him and clenched the front of his shirt in my blistered hands. This was a great man. You will not bury him without a prayer. I spoke slowly, with iron force behind every word. The lass is right, said the man who pushed the death cart. It was the first time he had spoken. He took a slim book from his pocket and offered it to me. Can ye read? I nodded and took the book from him. It was a copy of the Psalms, the pages worn thin and dirty from frequent use. I stared at the grave diggers. They took off their caps and bowed their heads. Movement in the park stopped as those watching laid down their shovels and bowed their heads. The book opened to the familiar words. I swallowed, cleared my throat, and began to read loudly so that all could hear. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The men around me moved their lips and then gave voice. Our voices rose together as one, proclaiming faith, joining in grief. At the end of the reading, some crossed themselves. Others wiped their eyes. I stood straight and tall. Thank you, I said. I handed the book back and walked away. There was nothing more for me to do. And again, this is Fever 1793, and it's written by Laurie, Halse, Anderson. So I want to close today by saying a couple of things. April is School Library Month, so I want to give a shout out to all my school librarian peeps. Well done, y'all. You're awesome. Also, I want to note that next week is National Library Week, and so any librarian, doesn't have to be a school librarian, should be honored next week. So if you happen to know a librarian or married to a librarian or parent of a librarian or just happen to have a librarian in your life that you really, really care about, definitely give them a thumbs up next week and let them know how much you appreciate them. Thanks as always for watching, y'all. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Stay well, stay healthy, take care of yourselves. I'll see you next Friday. Bye.